So we're recording, so I can't tell you any really good stories. My name is Thom Zahler. I write and draw many of the issues of the My Little Pony comic. I wrote and drew the Twilight Sparkle issue, the first issue of the micro-series, all about Twilight Sparkle. I have done 2 issues of Friends Forever. I did Fluttershy Zecora, which, being at the show, seemed like a really good idea right now. And I did Trixie Rainbow Dash. I also write and draw a comic book called Love and Capes, which is a superhero romantic comedy. It's about a superhero who says, I love my girlfriend, I'm going to tell her that. If I tell her that, I have to tell her everything. So is there ever a good time to let your girlfriend know you have X-ray vision? What does she want for Christmas when she knows you can crush coal into diamonds? Things like that. I have written a Star Trek short story for Pocket Books, and just recently I wrote an episode of the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, which should be on at the end of the year. And unfortunately, I'm NDA'd about that. So you can ask all the questions you want, but I can't answer any of them. Like even, is Spider-Man in it? I cannot tell you that. Cannot help you. So, I am dreadfully unprepared for this because I didn't know quite what to expect. So I figured I would just open the floor to questions, and then I'll probably babble a lot, and that'll fill some time. So, what do you guys want to know? I'm here. Yeah. Wrong. Okay, go ahead. Okay, can you guys all hear? Do I need to repeat the question? In the back, do I need to repeat the question? Is that better for... No? Good? Yes? Repeat the question. It was what's my general process? It depends on the project I'm doing. When I did Love and Capes, I wrote on Post-it notes, because it was an 8-panel grid where every 4th panel was a joke, so I would record the jokes, and it would give me an idea of what the beats were. With My Little Pony, it tends to be a lot more long-term, where I figure out what the story is going to be. I'll pitch a 2 or 3 sentence pitch to Bobby Curnow, my editor. A lot of times, especially after working on Twilight Sparkle, that's just to make sure that there's nothing that would stop me from doing it. So the original Twilight Sparkle pitch I did was that she found a book that her favorite author did. She fell in love with the book and then found out the author had never written again. So she decides to go out and find her. And they said, oh, you can't do that. That's a lot like... It got approved, and it was going through. And I'm like, all right, this is going to be great. There was this whole running gag where it was the stuff in the book that let Twilight Sparkle figure out where the author was. And since it was the greatest book ever written, I was going to liberally do parodies of great stories. So there'd be a bit that was Lost, there would be a bit that was Star Wars, stuff like that. And then about the week before it was supposed to happen, Hasbro came back and said, well, that's a lot like an episode that we've got coming up next year. So you can't do that. And I finally just saw the episode. It was the recent Daring Do one with Twilight Sparkle and Rainbow Dash. So I had to rewrite it, and my editor Bobby came up with a great idea to make it kind of like the movie Finding Forrester. If you guys have seen that, you're the man now, dog. That movie. It was a challenge though, because the problem with a 22-issue or 22-page format is that there's only so much real estate you have to set things up. And the point that I was going to generate a character that Twilight Sparkle loved her as an author, and she had disappeared, and there's only one other character in the book. I'm like, well, everybody's going to figure it out. I can't hide it. So one of the things that was important to me to respect Twilight Sparkle as a character was to have her figured out early. So there's I don't know how many of you guys have read it. I'm going to be spoiling it for you if you haven't, but please still stop by my booth and buy a copy. What happens is when the author has a big reveal and says, I am actually this J.D. Salinger-like character. I don't mean to blow your mind. And Twilight Sparkle basically says, yeah, I figured that out 5 pages ago. Because it shows that, Twilight Sparkle's not dumb. She would, if there are clues to be found, she would find them. So I thought that was a better way to handle it with the character. And became a lot more personal a piece. One of the other things that happened with it, and these are the kind of things that go into writing a story from a production point of view, the way that I got hooked up with My Little Pony is that IDW publishes my book Love and Capes, and they announced at Comic-Con a couple of years ago that we're going to be doing My Little Pony. My then girlfriend, now fiance, is a huge fan of My Little Pony. and IDW will do like 12 covers per book. So I went up to him and said, hey, and I'm just saying, is there any way I could do a cover? Because Amy really likes My Little Pony, and that I would like it if I could do something that she really likes. And they said, sure, do you want to pitch the book? And I said, I'm not stupid, yes. So, and then I went on a pony watching binge and learned about, I had heard about it from her, but there was still a lot of nuance that I didn't quite get. So I ran through it, pitched a bunch of characters, and they went with the Twilight Sparkle one, which turned out to be the first one, which was kind of daunting, especially because Andy and Katie set the world on fire with the first book. And it's like, oh, I get to follow that up. You couldn't start off low and just go like, oh, well, this is certainly adequate. It's like, no, this is the most amazing comic ever. Do the next issue. So it was a high bar to set. But in the comic, in the second, so Andy also hosed me on my book because he drew a crowd scene in the first issue where he drew Andy and Katie as ponies. And my fiance tells me, I want to be drawn as a pony. And I said, but you've read the script. There aren't any crowd scenes. It's 2 characters for the entire book. She says, yes, but I want to be drawn as a pony. And I said, yeah, but there aren't any crowd scenes. There's nowhere to put another character. I want to be drawn as a pony. All right, I'll figure out a crowd scene. So the reason why she comes into Canterlot on the train, she was always coming in on the train, but the reason there's a crowd of people who are bumping by her and getting ticked off that Twilight Sparkle is freaking out and paralyzed on the ramp is so that I could draw more ponies. So if you look, there is a red-haired pony with what looks like a Star Wars tattoo. There's just enough of it that I wouldn't get sued. That is Amy. And then her best friend is the pony with what looks like the Imperial Cog tattoo, but again, not enough that I get sued. And then her boyfriend, who's got the Star Trek Delta shield. Not enough to be sued. So that's why, but that's actually why that scene appears, is specifically so that I could draw more ponies and make Amy happy. Because I ain't stupid. So, what else you want to know? Think it over. Oh, I was dropped on my head a lot as a kid. I did a header out of a shopping cart when I was 2.5, and pretty much after that, I knew I was going into comics. I have always known I wanted to be a comic book artist. Artist, writer, letterer, whatever. I knew I wanted to do comics. My parents had a reward program when I was growing up because I was reading at a stupidly early age. So if I cleaned my room, I got a comic book. So I got a lot of comic books, and my parents had a very well-behaved kid. From that, I heard about this place called the Joe Kubert School of Cartoon and Graphic Art. It's in Dover, New Jersey. And back in the old days, because I am old. I was born 400 years ago in the Highlands of Scotland. No, but there used to be letter pages in comic books, and because of the production process, there's about a 5-month lag, almost 5 issues between when the first issue come out and when they would actually get letters. So they would run all sorts of biographies of the artists and writers, and I started seeing that a lot of them went to the school in New Jersey called the Kubert School. And much to the consternation of my mom, I said, hey, I want to go there. And she said, but you got a 4.0 Phi Beta Kappa National Merit Scholar. What are you be an artist for? It took a little bit of doing. My dad had done art, so he understood a bit more. My mom, it wasn't that she didn't think I could be an artist. It's that telling your parents you're going to be a comic book artist is like saying, I'm going to be a Hollywood star. I mean, it's that level of success. It doesn't sound like the best plan. And then I said, well, if that doesn't work, I'll go into stand-up comedy. And then she just gave up. Fortunately, it worked out. She is my biggest fan. My most ardent supporter, because there was a point where I remember her coming into my room and she said, when are you going to get your job? And I said, what job? And she said, the job you're going to have the rest of your life. And I said, that's the way your career works, not mine. I'm going to at some point be a freelancer, and that's how it'll be. So comics are done very piecemeal. So it is given to a writer who writes a script that looks like a movie script, given to a penciler who draws it in pencil, hence the name, gives it to an inker who does something that looks like tracing, but there's much more to it. Some comics are shot directly from pencil now. If it's going to be colored, the scans are given to a colorist who will color it on the computer. At the same time, it's given to a letterer, and the letterer will do the word balloons and sound effects on top of it. And when I started, and that stuff was all done through FedEx when I got out of school. Now it's all done through computer. I was a really good letterer, and nobody liked to letter. For me, it was very zen, and I always liked calligraphy, so I was into it. But most of the people that you go to school with hate lettering because it's so precise, and a lot of people don't have good handwriting anyway, so it's outside their comfort level. At school, people would pay me to letter their assignments, usually in pizza. So because it was a job nobody wanted, I was able to get lettering work almost, actually while I was working my last year at school. I was able to start doing lettering. And that got me into the industry. And then from there, it was going to conventions, hitting people up, saying, I want to do this, here's my samples, here's my samples, here's my samples. Eventually, because of the way comics have gone, because of the way production has gone, printing processes, I did a comic book in 2002 called Raider, which was an action-adventure book. The first one's available on Comixology. The second one will be up soon. It didn't go well. I'm proud of the work. I think it still holds up. Part of it was me outside my comfort zone as far as drawing. And part of it was that it's just my first project. It's where I made all my mistakes. So after that, I said I want to do something funny. I want to do something short. I don't want to do a 144-page book. I want to do a 24-page book. And I did Love and Capes. And I self-published that. And more than anything, self-publishing Love and Capes is what got me noticed. Eventually, IDW picked up publishing Love and Capes, so I didn't have to do that anymore. They were doing the trades at first, and then they did the individual issues. So I wrapped that up last year. Sorry, it becomes like con season, and I'm trying to remember which con was it where I did the last issue. I finished up the book. I'm going to be working on a new project with IDW, and I'm still going to be doing some pony stuff. I have pitches in. Yes, you in the brony hat. I'm sorry, did that answer your question? Probably very thoroughly. Yes. For My Little Pony, most of what I worked on was Love and Capes and Raider, but I also did a lot of illustration work for magazines and for newspapers. I have been completely freelance for over 10 years. It was November of 2001, so it was not long after September 11th. The economy was swirling around, going down, and I said, this is a good time to start my own business. Because every great success story starts with,
it was a terrible time to start a business, but Thom Zahler went out on his own.
That came out really well. I'm kind of happy with that. So I had always been freelance in comic book work while my first job was doing caricatures at an amusement park. After that, I worked at a newspaper doing advertising layouts, and then after that, I worked at an ad agency for a few years. I was always freelancing work, but I started getting enough lettering and enough illustration stuff that I was able to go off on my own. So I lettered all the Claypool books, Elvira, Deadbeats, Soul Searchers. I lettered the Stanley NHL project. I used to draw Slider for the Cleveland Indians, which was the Cleveland Indians' their current mascot. Looks like a giant purple Muppet because apparently Chief Wahoo has issues. By the way, we got LeBron. Yay. Nobody asked me if I'm taking my talents back to Ohio, but whatever. So I did all sorts of things like that allowed me to keep my career going until I got enough work in comics. One of the big things I did, in 2003, there was a Prilosec ad. It was a really irritating couple going around in a giant purple Winnebago talking about heartburn. But I did the illustrations on the bus. The weirdest thing ever was I was in Chicago, and one of their rapid transit public transport buses was shrink wrapped up to look like the Prilosec bus. So I turn, and all of a sudden my art is 10 feet high next to me. I'm like, I didn't like it when it was 8 inches. Oh, wow. But it was just wild. So I take whatever art jobs I can. I am a cartoonist artist full-time. That doesn't mean I'm always doing just comic books full-time. It is getting to be more and more comic books. So, yes, you in the brony hat, too. The process is always going to be different because you're always going to be working with somebody different. When you're writing a script that somebody else is going to draw, which my last two were, it was difficult for me because I am so used to drawing my own stuff that I'd never had to explain what I was doing. Some of that was helped about by working with Hasbro because I couldn't turn in a script that only made sense to me. I had to turn in a script that Hasbro could read and say, we want to do this. So you describe as much stuff as you can. When you get to know your artist better, you can start writing stuff for them, writing stuff they know to draw, stuff they want to draw, stuff you know they know how to draw, things that interest them. And when you have a good team, I always make sure that my artist has my number and my email and can hit me up with questions. When Tony drew the Fluttershy Zecora issue, there were a couple parts where apparently I was unclear, or I had the scene staged one way in my head and I explained it that way. And he said, "Oh, could I do it this way?" I'm like, "Yes, you can, because you're the artist, and I'm not gonna, unless I'm going for a very, very particular effect where I would overrule him or try to convince him to do it a different way." I think that back and forth is what's important. But the more information you can give them, and the more you can make the script itself interesting, so not so much the dialogue that's going on or the story or anything like that, but you want to write it for the artist, like you're talking to the artist. You don't want it to be just nothing but dry, like scene, day, a kitchen that has this and 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 this character is standing over to the left. You want to almost make it a story so that you don't want your artist to be drudging and trying to go through the script going, man, I wish it just gets to the point. If you're Alan Moore, you can get away with some of that. But Alan Moore, you also know what you're doing. And it's also important to, especially when the artist got the script, you can't surprise the artist. You don't want to go, oh, and on page 7, we finally get to find out that the character that was in the background for the last 6 pages is actually this character. So, hey, you need to let them know that character is going to be important early on. You're not writing the script for the audience, who can be surprised by it. You're writing the script for the artist, who needs to know all the stuff that he has to put in it to make it work. And the more you let him know what you're trying to do, or him or her know, but English doesn't have a neutral pronoun, sorry. The more you let them know what you're trying to achieve, the better they're going to be able to do it. Because I've run into situations where I've heard writers complain that artists says, oh, he just wanted to draw this big splash page so that it was, so that there was something for him to sell later. I'm like, or he was trying to make your page of 6 people talking interesting. You guys are kind of at cross purposes, and it's his job to take your script and make it as interesting as possible. If you wanted something different, there's a reason for that. You need to let them know what that reason is. The more information you can share with them, the better. Does that answer your question? You, not in a brony hat. Yes. Yes, Joe was one of my teachers. No, I can never remember if it's Adam or Andy either. It could be. Them I haven't met. I've met a lot of people who have gone to the school. Actually, Andy Price went to the school. He was a year or two ahead of me, which we just figured out a couple months ago in Denver, where it's like, you went to the Kubert school too? Really? Dan Parent, who draws for Archie, went there. But Joe was one of my third-year teachers. So let me talk about Joe Kubert, because he has been on my mind a little bit. Sorry, it's freaking me out that the door is open. If you can, yeah. Well, I mean, like, if they don't have it open for some sort of fire code reason or something. Okay. Joe ran the Kubert School, and I think there's a part where, when you're in college, you think things are going to be one way. And then you graduate, and they're not that way, and then you get irritated at the college for not being able to prepare you for it. And it's not always the college's fault. But when you talk to Joe, sometimes you would think, oh man, you're really talented and you're awesome and you never got old man drawing, which is a thing that happens in art. You're fantastic, but man, you don't know what it's like now. You want us to learn how to do everything, and comic book companies only want to see that you can do one thing. They don't want to see that you write and ink and letter and draw. They just want to see your pencils, because that's all they only want to react to one thing. In doing 11 Capes, I do the whole book myself, because Joe trained me to be able to do that. He gave me such a toolbox full of skills that has made me able to get so much more work. He may not have been right specifically about comics all the time, but the training he set out to give his students made us so able to wind up in any situation where we could finish something off. I have a friend who does a book that I letter, and his colorists are perpetually late on him. He's like, I don't know what to do. And I said, I know, that's why I learned how to color. I'm on time. So the more that you're able to do, especially in this, when I started off in comics, there were a lot of independent comic book companies, and they were like working for bad syndicated TV shows. They weren't great, but you were getting paid to do sample pages, and you learned your craft. You know, if you're working on a book that's not that good, you don't feel bad about erasing some of it to ink somebody else's work, because it's, my first job out of art school could not have been to ink Neil Adams, because my head would have exploded. You need me to ink somebody that's like, this guy's okay, but I think I can fix this. You want to feel like you can add something to it. That's missing these days, where you have big companies and you have people who are independent doing their one book. There's not as much of a great place to get paid to train. You wind up doing stuff on your own. But the training that Joe gave us, and I think has worked out so well, it lets you do the entire process yourself. I'm not the best inker in the world. I'm not the best colorist, but I'm good enough that I can get the piece out the door, and the more you do, the better you get. So I got no complaints. Joe was a force of nature, and the more I learn about him, the more I can learn from him. I mean, he ran a business. There's so many artists and writers who are horrible business people, and that's not Joe. He was good about making sure he got paid. And like when I do conventions, there's so many artists who and I am selling a grossly different set of product at this show than I do at most conventions. So if you see me doing this, it'll look a little different. There's so many people who set up at a convention and they write, they keep track of their orders by taking it on the back of an envelope. I'm like, no, I've got an actual form because I need to know what product I move on what day at what show, so I know what to ship the next year, because I know how much each issue costs. I know what it costs me. I know what it costs me to ship it. And I know, I can tell if a show is profitable and not, I made my table back. So, next question. Somebody not in a brony hat. I haven't called on you. I'm sorry, in the pony what? I have not. Not literally. There's very much me in every character that I'm writing, but I haven't put myself in it. I haven't quite had that sense of ego, which, as anyone who knows me, that's a shocking statement, because I have a Shatnerian ego. My God. But I will say, as a self-employed person, as an artist, as a writer, finding your inner Shatner is incredibly important, because you're not going to get if I had gone up to IDW and go, so, I hear you got a pony book, and you're not too busy if you don't have anyone else, could I maybe draw it? I've never drawn ponies before, but I wouldn't say it'd be printable. No, you go up and you say, I want to draw My Little Pony, and then you get the job and go, I guess I'm going to figure out how to draw My Little Pony now. You need that sense of confidence, because nobody's going to hire somebody who's, wishy-washy about it. You need to, be absolutely convinced in the moment that you can do it. So no, I have not put myself in it yet. That's getting less and less likely, because I'm writing more than I'm drawing, and I can't. The idea of I'm good friends with Tony Felice. The thought of asking him to draw me as a pony, I'm a little worried about what it would look like. So it'd have a Superman logo on the back, though. Cutie mark. Yes. So for writing, I do a lot of brainstorming first. The safest ways I do it, I take a lot of walks. What's weird, and if anyone was at the panel yesterday, I know I said this. The weird thing about taking a walk is I'll hit a point where I'm stuck, and I know if I take a walk, by the time I turn the corner coming back to my house, I'll have it figured out. And I still will resist taking the walk. It's like, I can figure this out on my own. I don't need to do it. It looks like it might rain. And then you go out and walk, and it's like, bam, there's the answer. I do a lot of Post-it notes. I will diagram things out. I mean, it's all very loose. I do keep bath crayons in my shower because I found that I get my best ideas in the shower, so that way I can write them down. As far as I'm concerned, that also means that my water bill should be deductible, but I haven't been able to clear that yet with my accountant. The unsafe thing that I did is that driving is really good for it. So my formerly mentioned fiance lived in California, and I drove out. So sometimes I wrote some notes in the car. But largely, it's a straight 7-mile road, and I just have to write a joke, and I don't have to look because I had contour line drawings in school. So, it's not like I'm stopping going, I think I'll write that. But I think it's very important to be bored. It is so easy these days because I love doing podcasts and I love listening to podcasts. And you can program your entire life at this point and never be bored, but that's when your mind starts free associating and says, what if Pinkie Pie went insane? Not like the insane she is now, but like really insane. What would that be like? It's those kind of thought experiments that help you write. So you need to have that downtime where your mind is not being engaged with something else. Drawing-wise, I draw with blue pencil and on tracing paper. I'll transfer it to a good piece of board, or I'll work on my Cintiq, and I will print stuff out as a blue line and ink by hand, and ink a lot of the stuff on computer. I've got originals from my Twilight Sparkle issue here if you want to see more. I know it's a writing panel, because I can talk about art forever. But hang on, you in the gray, because you... Nope. I'm a bad person to ask, because there's something about working in comics where you see how the sausages are made and you burn out on it a little bit. I'm finding older stuff that I really like. I actually just picked up the Super Friends Showcase trade because I got it as a gift for my godson, and I'm surprised at how entertaining those stories still are. And from a production point of view, the cool thing about it is that all the superheroes in it were the actual versions of the superheroes that you could read in the other books. So it wasn't like, watching Justice League Unlimited and then trying to figure out where that version of Batman was in the DC universe because he's not there. These were a lot easier to get into. I love anything by Mark Waid. Daredevil, in particular, is fantastic. I love Darwin Cook. He's kind of the artist and writer's artist and writer. He's the only name you can put on a Watchmen sequel and get people to pick it up because it's like, I don't know that you do a Watchmen sequel, but Darwin's doing it, so how am I not going to pick it up? Those are the big... I just read Batman Odyssey, which is Neil Adams' crazy Batman story. I don't know that it's good, but it's phenomenally entertaining. It's just whack. Like, all of a sudden a manta ray comes up and stabs a guy in the chest, and then Aquaman shows up and says, hey, Batman, you don't always take care of business, so I thought I would. And it's like, what? But it's really well drawn, and it's just... there is so much that happens in that book that and I like that kind of storytelling because there's so much stuff that's very decompressed. And I say this having written a superhero romantic comedy where people talk for 24 pages. But there's so much that, you would read a comic and it would feel like you watch an episode of a TV show, let alone a movie. And now so many comics make it feel like I'm watching an act and then I hit a commercial break and I have to wait a month. There's only so much of that I can take. I want stuff to happen. My friend Dwayne McDuffie wrote some Fantastic Four stuff, and I talked to him about it later, and I said, oh, it was just phenomenal, because all of a sudden this thing happened, and it didn't feel like we were writing for the trade. And he said, yeah, I just figured I could make more stuff happen. I'm like, oh, it sounds so simple, but yeah, as opposed to like padding it out and saying, I don't want to get to this beat until this issue. He's like, no, he does a beat when he wants to do the beat and just makes more stuff up and just keep going. I can't talk about the current pitch I have in for Pony, not too much of it. But Bobby wants me to do it in 2 issues rather than 4. And my initial thought is, no, I'm right. It should be what it is. But there's compromise involved. Bobby's a really good editor. So I took him at his word and thought about it and was like, it will be a different kind of story because my stories tend to be a little more open and a little slower paced, a little more easy, and this is going to force me to write a crazy Batman Odyssey type story. And I am so looking forward to that. So this is going to be the issue that's like, oh, that's not a big page, 2-page spread. It's like, there's a lot of stuff happening in this issue, and then these things happen, and then this happens. And then I want there to be a comic like that. I love that. So, you in the green, you had a question. All the time. You have to learn how to kill bad ideas. Sometimes it's a good idea to just try it out and see. The best example I can think of is in Love and Capes. There's a part where I decided to kill off one of the superheroes. And Love and Capes is a comedy, so I wanted to play it as a comedy. I wanted nobody to think he was actually dead because it's comics. And it would be taking this thing really lightly. And I told it to one of my friends because one of the other things that I think is very important is to find sounding boards so that you can, not people out in public, but people you trust who you can say, this is my idea, and they'll say, all right, that's a bad idea. Because you need that kind of honesty and someone whose opinion you respect. You have to know when they're wrong because occasionally they are. But this one friend of mine said, oh, I don't see that. That doesn't sound like a Love and Capes book. That just sounds too mean. And I thought about it, and then oh, he's kind of right. I guess if I wrote it serious, and so I did a death of a superhero in a comic, and I think it was successful. So let's, for purposes of this discussion, say it was. I made people cry, and I know that actually happened, and that's important because nobody thinks that death in comics is real, and I made you go for it, and I acknowledge the fact that he would probably come back at some point. But their character's saying everybody thinks it's like a soap opera, and the character's going to come back, and he's like, he's my son. I can't think like that. I made you care, and I would not have gotten to that point if I didn't have someone tell me you're heading in the wrong direction. I also have lots of pitches that don't get accepted. I pitched for the 6 characters for the micro series, and only the Twilight Sparkle one got picked up. I barely remember the Rainbow Dash one that I had. I know the Pinkie Pie one they thought was a little too much like an episode that had already been done. But there's even stuff like that I might figure out a way. I mean, that idea, for as much as I said you have to know when to get rid of stuff, it doesn't mean it doesn't hang around. And then at some point down the road I'll go, oh wait, that one little idea I had there, I could take that and do this with it. And that would be a lot more interesting. So even though you get rid of them, they don't completely go away. Like death in comics. Yes. There's a certain amount I don't know about what happens. So, but I will pitch Bobby like I said, 3 sentences. And he will tell me if it's good enough to go. Like I pitched the current idea I pitched. The 2 things that'll happen is 1, you'll write something that's a lot like an episode. 2, you'll write something that's a lot like a issue coming up. So I wanted to say, this is my general idea. I want to do this. Do you have anything like it in the pipeline? And he says no. And all right. So then I wrote 2 paragraph descriptions of what I thought every issue would be. And then he reviewed that again, and that's when he said, I think it's 2 issues, not 4. So I will write a longer, maybe a page, 3/4 of a page each for each issue. I believe that gets reviewed by Hasbro. And if Hasbro approves that, then I get to go to script. And then I write the script, that gets approved by Hasbro again, and then it's drawn. I get to see it when it's drawn. There's a school of thought that happens in comics now where a lot of writers go ahead and keep changing things after it's been penciled because the lettering isn't drawn on the page, it's on a computer, so it's real easy to fix. That drives me nuts, largely because I'm a letterer and I've had to deal with that. And I'm like, I didn't letter that wrong. You decided to change it, and you should know how to do it right. On the Trixie Rainbow Dash issue, there was something I added. And I think I actually added a sentence on the Fluttershy Zakora issue. I know I changed stuff on Twilight Sparkle, but I was drawing it too, so I knew I could move stuff around and take this line of dialogue and move it over here, and it wasn't going to be the end of the world. Then it gets approved by Hasbro again. So everything gets signed off by them at some point. So 2 or 3 times. They have to approve the plot, they have to approve the script, they have to approve the finished product. So, and I'm very careful not to change things just for the sake of changing them, or because, I think I know a marginally better way to do that. Because a lot of times you can just get in that mentality of, let me keep, tweaking the brushstrokes on the masterpiece rather than just putting out in the world and doing something new. But like with I don't know if you guys have read the Trixie Rainbow Dash issue, but I realized that it wasn't crystal clear how the crown worked. And I'm like, I want one more sentence that makes sure that I have explained this properly to the audience. And with Fluttershy Zecora, Fluttershy can't talk to animals, but we never see them. You never really see her talk in their language. You just know they communicate. And I wanted to get across the idea that when the animals were talking to her, it was special because she could mainline it. There was no level of translation. And we've seen her have difficulty talking to other characters like the vampire fruit bats. So I wanted it to be, this is why it's special. Because when the premise came out in previews, people are saying, but Fluttershy can already talk to animals. Why is it a big deal? I'm like, well, first of all, because they're talking out loud, and that's different. But I was respectful enough to it that I'm like, okay, maybe I need to drive home this point of why it's important to the story for this to happen. What else? Yes. You mean, like, do I like it, or how did I get into it? Okay, because I like it a lot. The best thing I did was I did my own thing, and that became my calling card, because I wrote a superhero romantic comedy that the world was convinced that didn't need to happen, and I knew that if I had done it, people would like it, and if I had gone to DC and said I want to write Superman as a romantic comedy, they would have laughed at me. Also, it wouldn't have been respecting the Superman character. Whereas the thing I did is kind of like Cloverfield, which is the world's greatest Godzilla movie that does not feature Godzilla. You can hide the Cloverfield monster for the entire movie, and nobody gets ticked off because nobody's waiting to see Godzilla. But if you did it with Godzilla, people would get irritated. But that was the best calling card I had. Especially as a writer, it is hard to get people to read a script, especially like an actual script. You can get them to read a comic book. So if there's any way you can get the thing produced in such a way that they can see what it is, it becomes a lot faster for them to read it. Because you're never going to you will never be able to go to a table at a convention and drop a script and have them do anything other than nice margins, and I like your use of font here. They're never going to sit down and read it. So you have to make it as easy as possible for them to see it. It is a tough road to hoe to get in as a writer. And if I wasn't able to draw my own stuff, I don't know. There would have been a lot more effort involved. So if you can find someone to produce the thing for you, it makes it a lot easier for you to get read, for people to decide that they want to hire you to do something else. The other way to do it, and I'm not necessarily recommending this, is be awesome at something else. So the current, not Wonder Woman, the current writer of Batgirl, I think, I could be wrong. There's been a lot of news in the last few days, and I was putting in a hardwood floor in my house, so I wasn't paying attention. There's a writer, I think, of Batgirl, who comes from a novelist background, which is different to get into. But if you are awesome at something, your opportunities to get work change. The same way that I didn't get my Spider-Man job the way most people do. I came in as a comic book artist who had people say, I would like to see you write a script. Could you do a spec? And then we'll start showing it around, and that's how. But I don't have the pedigree of being trained as an animation writer. I have the pedigree of being a successful comic book writer. So that's another way to go in. It depends what you're trying to go for and what opportunities you're looking for. But I will say it is not the easiest thing in the world. Yes. Question? Yes, you. So, Rainbow Dash and Trixie, I love telling this story because this is endlessly fascinating to me. I was reading I'll read a lot of Wikipedia because it is a shorthand way to condense a lot of stuff, and it just gives you ideas about what to do. And I was reading the description for Trixie again, because Rainbow Dash is arrogant, and I like the idea of writing a character who's cocky and like William Shatner, because I love Captain Kirk. And I'm like, okay, well, that would be fun to play with, and that was in the back of my head. And then I read the description for Trixie, and I said, she's Harry Mudd from the old Star Trek. She's the arrogant con man who gets herself into trouble and winds up in over her head. I'm like, I can write a Harry Mudd story. That's easy, because once you figure out that paradigm of what you're trying to write, all sorts of ideas that they weren't necessarily My Little Pony ideas, but anytime I had an idea that was essentially that kind of story, all those options became quickly available to me. Which is, Trixie winds up over her head as Queen of a Kingdom, and Rainbow Dash is the one who has to save her. And it's two characters who are really arrogant, being arrogant with each other. And it's great. The Fluttershy Zecora story, also, I'm a big Star Trek fan. It's a Q story to me. And Discord is obviously Q in a lot of ways. So that comes as no surprise to anyone. But my favorite scene in that is where Zecora meets Discord, and they know each other. Because there's only so much of that stuff we can get away with. So I wasn't sure they were going to let me do that. But I just like the idea, it's supposed to play the same way as when Guinan met Q. Where it's like, oh, these people... Because in my mind, Zecora is like the Doctor Strange of the My Little Pony universe. Her job is to keep the magical trains running on time. And, she's a frontline character for that. So I take aspects of that and bring it in. Because we can't change things. We can't introduce... You can introduce some new things. One, it's got to get approved. And then two, it doesn't mean it will stand. So if I gave Princess Celestia a cousin you never heard of, I might be able to get away with that. But if they decided they were not going to do that, that's going to invalidate my story. And being genre fans, we can all accept that, I like the Star Trek novels, I like the Star Wars novels, but that doesn't mean J.J. Abrams is going to follow any of them and look Chewbacca's back, which is a good thing, because I didn't like that they killed him off. That you run into that when you're working on things that you don't have any control of. It's not like Hasbro talks to us, except to tell us when we need to change stuff. I didn't know Twilight Sparkle was getting wings. I don't know. The closest I get to spoilers is when I say you can't do that story. So I'm like, oh, okay. But we don't get... that's why, for the stuff we're pitching now, none of us are pitching stuff that would take place in Season 5, because none of us know what it's going to be like. We have an idea, but until the show sets up the rules, we don't know what they are. So, I feel like I drifted off in the middle of that question. Or that drifted off point. I was completely awake for the whole thing. But, okay. I would love to work on the animated show. For a couple of different reasons. One, because I like work, and I'm a big fan of money. I cannot deny that. But one of the cool things is that now that I've written animation, it becomes easier to write more animation. And I now have a background in writing on Pony, and I have a background in writing in animation. And hopefully that gets more interesting to someone. So it's still a competitive field. So it's not the easiest thing to make happen, but the more things you do that can make you unique or make you interesting to someone who's going to hire you. The one thing I will say about the Spider-Man episode, because it doesn't give anything away, is that I wrote it very quickly, because they needed it very quickly. And apparently I did that part well. So that's becoming like a calling card that the story editor can say, oh, you should hire Tom, because he turned the story around incredibly fast, and it was good. I don't want to do everything at that pace, but I'll take whatever I can get to get noticed. So, like next time I go out to San Diego, I know someone who has seen this drawing I've done of the ponies as Avengers, and it's being sent to somebody who works on the show. And I'm not saying that will turn into anything, but it is closer than I am right now. So, on my pace on which? I think I wrote the first draft in a week. Yeah, it was like 3 really intense days up at Starbucks. Because one of the other things I do, it's weird. I can draw in my house, admittedly, because all my gear is there. But when I write, especially when I plot, I go up to Starbucks or Panera because there are marginally less distractions there. It's the current project I'm working on, the one I can't talk about for IDW. I keep hitting a wall and not knowing what to do with it, and it's amazing how much gets written when I sit down and start writing it. Even if I don't know where it's supposed to go, you can start figuring it out. So going up to Panera and kind of saying, all right, here's the deal. You're going to go up there and you're going to have the chicken salad sandwich you like, and you'll probably get a brownie, but you're going to write 10 pages too. That trade-off seems to work because when I'm at my house, I could make that same deal with myself. But there's also a level of, yeah, but the laundry needs to be folded. And as long as you're here and not doing anything, maybe you could do that. Where those kind of distractions get in the way. So just allocating time to actually sit and write, even if you don't get as much done as you thought, you'll get more done than you would have if you hadn't. At least for me, so much of this stuff is personal. And, so when I draw, there's this thing I do where a lot of times I will take my socks and I will roll them halfway down my feet. And I don't know why. But there's a point where you go, I don't care why. That seems to help me. So I'm going to stop, do I want to say that? No. As long as it's not hurting me or other people. If that's what it takes, or it might be silly to have a lucky shirt, but if you have a lucky shirt, go for it. If that actually is making it easier for you to write, it doesn't matter if it's silly. It doesn't matter if it's not washed. Just do it. Because whatever crutches you need to start going on the road is what you need to do to get going. You wind up figuring out what works best for you and then making that stuff happen. Yes. Follow up. Man. See, there's a lot of ageism in comics. There's a lead-in for that. I was born sometime in the 70s. Yes, it was the decade before the 80s, but after the 60s. The industry does change, but it's always changing. So the playing field is never the same. You just want to figure out what the rules are about 5 years ahead. So now, people who are coming up now can make a webcomic in a way that I couldn't. Even working on Love and Capes, I would not have been able to do that book 5 years before because having Photoshop made a huge difference to being able to generate pages that could be separated rather than having to hire a color separator to make the separations and paying those bills. So I think what's happening is it is becoming easier to produce a piece and get it distributed. But as a result, that is becoming more people in the chain that you have to get past. There's more of a signal-to-noise ratio. One of the things that happened, particularly with graphics, is being an advertising guy. Once desktop publishing really became prevalent, people thought they could do it. And they couldn't. They just made very neat-looking crap. Because if you have to cut the page out and you have to paste it down, there's a certain physical skill set that you have to learn to do that. And that keeps people from being part of it. Once you take those things away and it becomes able for people to put text on a page and have it lined up perfectly and do all the keylining stuff that you have to know how to do, they think, hey, 10 fonts on the page, I think that looks good. You're actually wrong. But, it lets them jump a step. I see the same thing with lettering, where I learned how to letter by hand. I letter on computer now. I lettered the Twilight Sparkle issue. I learned how to letter by hand, so I know the process. It's like math, where I know what steps I'm skipping. I know what steps I'm doing in my head. And if you don't have that process, then you don't know what you're trying to emulate. So it is completely different. But on the other hand, you're in a market where so many of your successful films are based on comic books. That's not bad. I know, at the Kubert School, when I went, there were 4 women. And now it's 40% women. And I think that's awesome. The more voices, the better. But all that stuff changes. It's your job to look ahead and see where things are going to go. It's easier, like I said, it's easier to make a piece now to get people to read it, but so many more people can make pieces where it is harder to get it noticed. And from working in an advertising field, I tend to think of everything as a marketing problem. So that's just the way my brain works. When I launched my Raider book at Comic-Con, I very much did that Princess Bride thing where you're like, all right, what are my assets? He's like, we have a Holocaust cloak. Oh, you tell me that. I knew I could do caricatures. So I sat and I did caricatures for 4.5 days for free, for 10 hours a day, because it meant that I had a line, and people would stop because they'd go, there's a big line here. I wonder what this is. And then when you sat to get your free caricature, that was 5 minutes I got to talk to you and tell you why you needed to buy my book. And that got me better at pitching. But one of the other things you have to do if you're going to go in the field is you have to figure out what you're good at and figure out how to make that work for you. If you don't speak well in public, 1, learn, but 2, figure out how to do less of it if that is a problem for you. I mean, when people ask me what stuff you need to do to become a writer or an artist, I say, look, you got to take the art classes, you got to take the English classes, take an accounting class, take a speech class, because these are skills that you're going to need to be able to present yourself. And it doesn't seem obvious to you when you are in school that, oh, I really should learn how to speak in public so that I can pitch my book. But you really should. And there's a subset of artists that I think is a fairly large subset that would not be comfortable being up here right now talking to you about it. I love talking, but it's figuring that out because I was a shy kid. And it took me a while to get past that, but that is something I had to teach myself so that I was able to get more work. Yes. I'm on the next panel too, so I'm just going to keep talking. Yes. It wouldn't be for the news. Well, no, that's not true. Because I'll write for anyone who's going to pay me. I don't like the new Star Trek. So it's loud and it doesn't make any sense. And Khan's master plan is to beam to the Klingon homeworld and hope that Kirk is given a mission that he doesn't follow and shoots his people as torpedo. Wait, no. I would love to write Deep Space Nine. Because that is my favorite of the modern shows. I think there's lots of really interesting there. The story I did for Pocket was my friend Bob Ingersoll and I wrote it. And it was a Riker story that's set between... it's set not long before Nemesis. So it's right before Troy and Riker get married, because I blew a hole in his chest. And he is kept alive, but he thinks he's going to die. And no one else thinks he's... I mean... People in the story might, but nobody else in reading it is going to think they're going to die, but that's not important. Riker's got to think he's got to die. And a large part of it, along with the actual story, well, along with the actual physical stuff that happens, is Riker has to write a message to Troy because he doesn't think he's going to see her again. And it's done, before the wedding. And I thought, man, that's interesting. I like playing on those relationships. The more I've written stuff, the less I want to write things that are direct sequels. Because, especially with Star Trek, it has a greatest mission statement in dramatic history. Seek out and explore strange new worlds, find new life, new civilizations. Don't retell Star Trek 2. Like Into Darkness. So I just think doing that makes it a lot, finding those things make it interesting. And honestly, it's the same thing in Pony. The thing I pitched has a couple callbacks to things that are happening. Things that have happened on the show. Things that have happened on the show this year. But I don't want the story to be about that. I just wanted to reference it. Okay. Oh, sure. No. Yeah, see, I'm on the drawing panel, and I know they have to set up again, yes? So I can... Okay, because I can keep taking questions until this is set up. Did they have a computer for me? It is. You want to make it your own, and you want to make it something you're proud of. I don't ever want to just turn in a script because as much as I have already mentioned I like money, I don't want the script to be just that part of the exchange. I want it to be something I can be proud of. It's got to be within a certain percentile of what I'm looking for. I will admit I do read reviews. I only listen to the good ones, though. But it was nice with the Trixie Rainbow Dash and the Fluttershy story. And actually, honestly, with the Twilight Sparkle, how many people react really well to it. But with the Rainbow Dash one, people thought that I really got Trixie right, and they were really glad to see that particular story. And I'm like, okay, well then I know I've added something. And that's a really good feeling. Katie and Andy tell the story that the writers of the show like the Chrysalis episode so much that they're having a hard time ever bringing her back because they don't want to invalidate their story. And I think that's the biggest compliment you can pay them. So I don't know that any people from the show have ever read my stuff. It would be cool if they did. But I want stuff that is so good that people who are reading the books, it becomes part of their canon. And they just assume, they will figure out a way to make it work that this was always part of the story. So I want to do something that respects the characters, does something interesting, especially with the comics. I want to do something they can't do on the cartoon. The nice thing about Friends Forever is that it's My Little Pony Brave and the Bold. It's team-ups. You couldn't get away doing a My Little Pony story that didn't have 5 of the main 6. Because you only got 22 episodes, and people want to see a certain thing, and if it's not there, they're going to be upset, and kind of rightfully so. But in in the micro series and in Friends Forever, we can do stuff you can't do in the way they normally tell stories, unless you tell a different story. And we can do things that are more complicated and visually different. You want to write your medium. You don't want to write. So many people, like when they write Star Trek, or the worst one I saw a lot was Buffy. Until Joss Whedon was writing Buffy. Because one of the things that impressed me about Joss Whedon is he knows how to write a comic book, too. It drives me nuts that he can do all that stuff. But so many of the Buffy scripts that came out felt like they were people's rejected Buffy script pitches. So there were lots of scenes of characters sitting around being snarky in the library. When really what you wanted to see was, the first script that Joss Whedon did, Angel took on a giant 20-foot demon that they could never afford to do on the show. So do something that you can do in that medium that you can't do in the show. Like, part of me wants to do a musical episode or a musical issue. That's really hard to do because there's no music on the page. So I'm going to figure out a way to do it, but you have to figure out ways to do something that you can't either. You have to figure out a way to make it work as a comic, or figure out something that is not being done on the show that you think you could do in a comic book differently. I can do one more question, then I'm going to be drawing for you, I think. Well, I pitched My Little Pony versus Mars Attacks. I was at a panel in Baltimore, and Dirk Wood. Do any of you guys know Dirk Wood? He works for IDW.
He has a very distinctive voice.
He said, we're going to be doing Mars Attacks, IDW, but we're not going to say what. And I said, I say My Little Pony, and yes, that's a pitch. And he said, if you can get it to me by the end of the panel. So I wrote it while I was sitting up there. The idea was that the aliens from Mars Attacks came through to Equestria, but because of a spell that Princess Celestia had placed on Equestria, their weapons didn't work. So they kept trying to be violent, and they weren't able to. So it basically would just devolve into pie fights and things like that. But because they lose violence as a way of expression, they actually learn the magic of friendship. And then they leave, and they go back to their home dimension, and they meet other Martians who don't understand them anymore and destroy them. I thought this was great. I don't know if it's Hasbro that says no, or if it's something that IDW decides. The licensees, the license holders have to decide if you can get away with something like that. And with something like My Little Pony, a lot of times people are very protective of it. They want to make sure that it doesn't, it's not taken lightly, goes far afield. You want to make sure that you respect it, not just do something for cheap thrills or something like that. So, are we ready to draw yet? Or okay, because I can stall. Let me tell you more about me.
Fine. All right. So first rule, sketch lightly. This is very important because both of us, our styles, will use erasing a lot. Some people, when they first get into art, they seem to think that, if you erase, you made a mistake. Cannot be further from the truth.
I erase all the time.
I erase as much as I draw, probably more. So definitely a very important thing, draw lightly so that you can erase later. That's really just the most important rule going forward. If I think of more, I'll chime in. But Mr. Zahler's going to start showing you how to draw.
I don't say this in a mean way. It's Zahler. Rhymes with Zahler.
Oh, Zahler?
But everybody does it wrong. Seriously. I'm the one with the funny name. So, kind of the same way, what I do, especially when I draw at home, I start with a non-repro blue pencil. If any of you are really into it, come by the booth. I have pencils there that I can show you. Because they're not like the Prismacolor ones that you pick up that are really waxy and you can't erase and you can't ink over. They're a different kind of pencil. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start drawing in blue. I will draw in a darker blue than I normally draw so that you can see it. And then that will be my light pencil layer that you are doing. Does that make sense? All right. This is also not my normal setup, so there's going to be a lot of me going back and forth going, wait a second, this is... Someone asked me about process stuff in the last panel. I have a Nostromo gaming pad next to me that has all my key commands mapped to Photoshop, so I can do that. I am not going to draw a pony. I'm going to draw Zecora, because that seems vaguely appropriate. So, figuring that this is my page, so I've got it turned to the side. One of the things you want to do is you want to figure out roughly where your drawing starts and stops. You don't want to... The reason you sketch out lightly is you don't want to do a really awesome Zecora head and then realize that you do not have enough room to draw the rest of her body. So I'm going to rough this out. I'm going to draw a circle for her head. And then the bodies tend to be bean-shaped. They're about 3 heads tall. So that lets me know that 1, 2, 3. Here, I'm going to make another layer. I'm going to change the color. 1 head. 2 heads. Count with me like a count from Sesame. Ho, ho, ho. 3 heads, but that helps you keep the proportions of the character. And that layer goes away. So their neck will come from the back of the head and from about halfway down in the head. And that lets me know where to draw the bean shape that is their body. I'm just messing your entire computer setup now. Does this have the thing where you can flip it over to get the eraser? Oh, okay, okay, it's not just me. Alright, the ponies have what are called radial joints. So you won't see them bend their leg like that. You'll see them bend their leg like that. So I'll do 2 convex. That's a little wide. Two convex lines for the front hoof, and they tend to flare out and get a little wider at the bottom. And then one that matches on the other side for her front. You guys all have, because I realized I was talking and drawing fast, and I don't mean to do that quite so much. So for her back legs, I'm going to take this area If I start going too fast, just raise your hand and I'll slow it down. I don't know what a good pace is anymore. I'm going to cut this line in half because I know that there will be an oval shape for the first part of her leg. And the second part is another cylinder. But that gives me a guideline of where those things will fall. And again, I'm going to match those lines on the back to draw her other leg. So just about all the ponies, especially all the female ponies, have the same general shape. At this point, I could turn this into just about any of the characters. So if you've got this kind of skeletal structure down, it makes it easy to go from there. With Zecora, one of the things that is different about her, so now I'm going to go to her face. Most ponies will have the slighter snout like that. Zecora does not. Hers comes out square. So I can take that circle and extend it out and get the very zebra. It's a lot like the design for the male horses, male ponies, where it comes out and it's a little more straight lines. And then I can start drawing the ear. Ha! I knew I somehow rotated that. Stop. Alright, her mohawk starts about here and goes all the way down to her back. It's going to get lost in the rings that she wears, but that's about where you're going to draw it. And her tail is tied up. So it comes out as a small cylinder from her hindquarters and then flares out with a couple of big S shapes. And there's a notch on top of that to break up where the hair splits at the end. Zecora also doesn't have Zecora also, I'm going to show this with the... So don't draw what I draw next. Most of the ponies have very wide eyes. Like that. Let's see if that's it. They have some version of round eyes. Zecora does not. Zecora's eyes are almost four straight lines. There's a little more curve to them than that. But it goes up in an L shape, swoops down, and over again. The more you soften that, the more you curve it, is where you can get more expressions in her face, but it's that general shape. And again, this is kind of like the way the princess eyes look. She has a large earring. And then she has 5 rings on her neck. Four, 5. And you notice that as I draw, I'm moving stuff around a little bit, because as I get more precise about what I'm drawing, the more I can figure out how I want it to look and go, oh, that needs to be moved just a 1/4 inch to the left. But that's why you start off drawing light. Zecora is also kind of interesting in that she is not a mirror reflection pony. So, for the most part, if you take Twilight Sparkle or Pinkie Pie or Fluttershy and you look at them in a mirror, they look the same. Zecora actually has things that only occur on one side of her body. So she has again the 5 rings on this front leg. She's got the same little upturned circle smile type shape for her nostrils and the same type of pony mouth. And up here on her mohawk, that splits the same way that her tail splits. Because as you've got a bunch of hair coming out, from the source it all comes out as one piece. Then when you get to the end, it's like looking at a broom where it starts breaking off into separate sections. So, do we all have this? Alright, this is where I'm going to start getting darker. So I'm going to lighten this a little bit so that it's easier for me. Can you guys still see that? Now I'm going to switch here to a black. I'm going to test this out a little bit. I do not like that. Alright, so you know how I did that? Yeah, how I turned it. Okay. Sorry, I accidentally turned this image. This one? No. Okay. One of the weird things that happens when you're drawing on computer is that you have a certain set of things that you're used to doing a certain way, and you build like key commands and shortcuts and all sorts of stuff that when you get on a different computer is very different. So anyway, we have this the structure for Zecora. And if it helps you guys, wait, that sounds really arrogant. I don't mean to say it that way. I often need to look up what some of the ponies look like, especially some of the background ponies or recurring characters like Zecora, because I haven't drawn them enough to know exactly where every stripe is. At this point, I can draw Twilight Sparkle with my eyes closed, but if I needed to draw Flim and Flam, I would need to look them up. There is nothing wrong with getting reference out for things. So, I'm going to start with her eye. That's just a personal preference because the eyes are so interesting to me. And start darkening that up. I'm getting a thick end of the lash on the side here, or on the far left of the drawing, which gives it some sort of weight. When I ink, traditionally I ink with brush, so I tend to get a little more pop to my drawings than some like dead micron lines that you get where they never change width. And I think that makes the drawing a little bit more interesting. It also does something that you can do in print that you can't do on the show, because those lines have to be a certain way so that they can be reproduced over and over. Obviously the eye is 2 circles. I'm going to leave that white area inside for where the reflection is off the iris of the eye. And then I'm going to now start going and darkening the basic shape of Zecora. The last thing I am going to do is start putting in her stripes. So I'm doing mostly the outline and the shapes that make her up. Stripes will be kind of the most complicated thing that you do, but they're so much easier to put in when you have the rest of her drawn. Remember that the shapes overlap. So when you have her forward leg, the one that's closest to your eye, to the camera, whatever you want to call it, that is going to overlap her body, and then the back leg is going to be behind her body. One of the things that makes the ponies kind of difficult to draw is how simple the shapes are. So things like her back leg, you don't have... It's not like when you draw somebody's hair and there's a lot of little pieces to it that you can draw sketchy, 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 sketchy. You have to nail it on when you make that one line. And I'm darkening up some of the lines so that there's a little more weight. I am assuming that my light source is over here in front of her face, which means that lines that are away from the light source will get a little thicker, a little darker. That helps put a little bit of pop into your drawing. And at this point, I feel comfortable getting rid of my pencil lines. And now I'm going to call up the picture of Zecora I was looking at so that I can draw her markings. I'm going to switch to a thinner pen because I want her outline to be the most important thing. And working in just black and white, the thinner that you make the lines on them, the less they stand out. It doesn't look like it's two pieces fused together. It looks like it is a large piece with markings on it. So the front part of her mohawk comes all the way down into her head. The rest of her markings follow the line of where the skull would actually be. But the first one comes down, and so does the second. And this is where you can get a little sketchy. Again, stuff they can't quite do on the show. Stuff I can't necessarily do on a pad I'm not used to. But you can do a little more of like the hairline effect than they can do on the show because you only have to draw it once and they have to be able to replicate it over and over in the Flash animation. Her snout is a curve that is in the same direction as her skull. It comes down with a straight line back towards her nose, and then round again. She has 3 pointed stripes on her cheek then. 1, 2, 3. She has 3 pointed stripes on her back. And then the banding on her leg is consistent, but sometimes the stripes on her are not. She does have actual hooves that are a separate color from the rest of her legs, unlike most of the ponies. I'm going to draw those in. Her stripes are all pointed, so they go from thick to thin and end in a point. They don't wrap around, they don't band any of her arms or legs the way that the metal bands that she wears do. It's all stripes that start off thick to thin. They're all kind of triangular. So even on that one that I just drew, it's still going thick to thin, and it would end. If you rotate that drawing so towards her backside, you would see it end in a point. There's 2 more here. one here. And she has stripes on her tail as well, where they change color. And then her cutie mark is a spiral. With triangles surrounding it as a sunburst. I'm just going to put a little more weight in a couple of these things. And for added depth, I'm going to draw a shadow. And like I said, since I have the sun, I have my light source here, the shadow would be cast behind her. So you can fill in with a pencil. I, on the computer, can do fill if I can find it. So going from light to dark and having those sort of areas where it's thick, where it's thin, gives your drawing a lot more form, a little more depth, and makes it a little rounder. So, hey, that's what I do. Any questions?